Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Why We Huddle. Today, we head back to the SEC, but not too terribly far from Stillwater, because today we are checking out the Missouri Tigers, and we're going to talk a little MIZZOU. And welcome to the show, Skeeter. How are you doing tonight?
Daniel, I'm doing good. Something we'll talk about later in the show. I'm just laid up in bed recovering from my third surgery in a matter of 6 weeks. But I'm good, and I'm excited to be on here and talk about why we huddle.
Perfect. And I got to say, I've heard of a captive audience, but laid up in bed, you might be the captive, guest tonight.
Yeah, I have nowhere to go. Yeah, yeah.
Yep. So I guess let's go ahead and get into it. Of course, we're here to talk about Mizzou, a school that even a lot of SEC people now 10 plus years in don't really know about. So starting off, what are some things that you can tell us about Mizzou and the Tigers?
Well, first off, I think it's the greatest program to never have won a national championship. Even though we have one we could claim from 1960, we don't, and I'm okay with that. But Mizzou has a very long history, very rich history that just a lot of people don't know about because they've not consistently been, uh, at the elite level or good level. It's been a roller coaster ride. You go back and look at our year by year history, and it's a lot of ups and downs. So we are uh, second fiddle or second thought, to a lot of schools across the country. A lot of football fans, they think, Mizzou's not what comes to their mind when they think college football. Uh, that's okay. You know, Even now, 10 plus years into the SEC, a lot of people saying you don't belong in the SEC. That's fine too. Like, yeah, geographically, we're probably not. Columbia, Missouri is not the southeastern part of the United States. It is, right there in the good old Midwest. And uh, but a lot of the schools that are telling us we don't belong in the SEC are the schools that get beat or have a losing record to us in the 10 years we've been there. So I understand why they don't want us in there, because they didn't like little old Missouri coming in from the Big 12 and being a better school than them. But, it is a talent rich state that a lot of people don't think of when they think of talent. Majority of it coming from the St. Louis area. But then you also have Kansas City on those side of the state, which is much larger than St. Louis. Uh, but it's a great state, great school. We were the only Division One university in the state until this coming year. I believe Missouri State and Springfield is bumping up. I cannot remember which conference they're going to, but they are now going to be a D1 school as well. So getting a little competition in there.
Awesome, awesome. So since making, I mean, obviously, third set of Tigers coming into the SEC. Since making the jump, what is the feel of Missouri fans with the SEC since it has been, I think 13 seasons so far of play, maybe 12?
12, I think. I think 2012 was our first year, so it maybe only be 11 seasons. But um, for the whole in-person fans and everything, I think the general fan base loves it. The southern hospitality and everything is a real thing for the most part. Now, you get online, you get into Twitter, you get to arguing with 14-year-olds, and you don't, you on Twitter, there's so much trash. I say I love it because it gives everybody a platform, but I also hate it because it gives everybody a platform. And you know, but as a whole in general, um, we've developed some good rivalries, so to say, or games we look forward to. Who would have thought Missouri and Florida, is a game that you kind of each school, not saying anybody else in the country, but I don't think Mizzou's like, oh, we got Florida, we're going to lose. I don't think Florida looks at Mizzou as, oh, we got Missouri, we're going to lose. Like, it's a game both teams go into, and the fans expect to win, and it's kind of created a fun energy and vibe when we get to those games. There's been some games on both sides that y'all don't want to go back and watch the tape, but there's also games we don't want to go back and watch
Yep.
the tape of, but it is much more enjoyable and for the brand wise to be in the SEC than where we came from in the Big 12. Uh, you probably never thought of Missouri Tigers until we joined the SEC. Uh, when we were playing the likes of Oklahoma State, Iowa State, K State, uh, there's another school that shares a state with K State that I won't talk about, but all the schools in Texas and all that. That kept a Midwestern vibe going, but not a national brand. And so I believe we're starting to dip our toes into the national brand. And Eli Drinkwitz, you give that man a microphone, and he'd get on some Sports Center or Paul Feinbaum, hot takes in there and get people talking about Mizzou a whole lot more.
Now, you talked about Florida, Missouri, being games that both teams go into thinking, here's a game I can win. And you kind of touched on rivals. What would you say some newer rivalries in the SEC are for Missouri?
Uh, well, I mean, with the schedules been the way it has since we joined, you know, South Carolina, we have the Mayor's Cup that we compete with them. Uh, Tennessee, it's been, I think it's close to a 50-50 split on wins and losses since we joined. So uh, Kentucky's one that we never know what's going to happen. And then, we've been forced in this Arkansas. And me personally, I live in Arkansas now, moved here in 2020. And it's one that a lot of Arkansas fans say we're not rivals, but they do sure love to talk about some Missouri Tigers any chance they get, talk down about them, not talk up about them. But it's probably our biggest rival since we joined. But now all that changes with OU coming in the conference. We have, I think, 96 football games of history to go back against them. Wish it was a little bit more in our favor than what it is. I mean, uh, that's one of them schools that you look at their tradition and you wish, Florida's one. You're probably not too jealous of too many other schools' traditions or records or, their past history. But Missouri, we do have some schools that we look up to and wish, like, man, we wish we had that history. And OU's one of them. I think they beat us about 66% of the time, 2 out of every 3. And but with them coming in, that's going to be our most historic rivalry by far. And I think we've kind of surpassed them as far as talent on the field, and I think they're going to have a few hard years of learning what SEC talent is. Mainly, one thing that I've learned: I don't care how good your offense is. If it's your front, you got to have big boys on both sides of the ball that can play, and that's what wins and loses the big time games in the SEC is that line play. So, uh, I know that's a long winded answer. I would probably say my favorite, Kentucky. I think just because it's so there's been some back and forth games there, and I like their fan base, and I think we're pretty similar programs history wise. Mizzou might have even a little bit more of a better history than Kentucky, but that's probably my favorite rivalry that we have developed in our 11, 12 years in the SEC.
And historically, what would you say some of the rivals are? I mean, obviously, you hinted earlier. I'll say it because I know you don't want to. Kansas. What are some other, past rivals that maybe we don't get to see too much anymore?
Well, I mean, Kansas is the rivalry for Mizzou. It's not. It's not just a rivalry. I think both fan bases agree. We hate each other. It's not a dislike. It's a hate. Um, and I know we were taught at a very young age we're not supposed to say the word hate, but that's one sentence I will let my kids allow to say is I hate Kansas. So, uh, you know, the Big 12 rivalries to me, that's when I was growing up and learning to love this game of football and love the University of Missouri. And so the Big 12 rivalries stick out to me, the Oklahoma States, the OU, Texas, all those schools. But uh, as far as long histories, I don't really think there is one aside from Kansas. That is the rivalry.
Yeah, and I've got to say, I know it's probably not on the list of rivalries, but you talked earlier about maybe Mizzou wasn't on the minds of SEC people as much, before they joined, and I'd say that's somewhat true. One thing I can say is there's a Mizzou game, and I hate to bring it up, but it's what got me first to notice Mizzou, and it's because Mizzou let me down. 1997, I guess they call it the flea kicker.
Nebraska.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Which I've got to say, anyone watching this that has not seen it, go watch it. Is for a team that ran the triple option as much as Nebraska did and ran all sorts of options. You've got to see this pass play. It's one of my earliest specific play memories watching college football. And I did not like Nebraska because they had demolished us a few years earlier in the national title game. And I'm like, oh, look, this Missouri team I've not heard of is about to pull it off.
Yeah.
And
So it's the only time I ever heard my great grandfather say a cuss word was that game. The only time in my life that that man ever cussed in front of me was that game. Yeah,
yeah,
uh, I,
it,
I don't miss the Cornhuskers.
yeah, I didn't think you would, but since I didn't hear them come up, I'm like, maybe it's appropriate to at least say,
I
here's
would have
my
loved to play them the last 10 years. you know, we could get that head to head number looking a little bit better for us the last 10 years, but I don't miss them or their fans.
well, you've been able to play us the last 10 years. So, I mean, hey, it kind of makes up for it.
Yeah, yeah. I look forward to the Florida game. It's one of them. Really, in the SEC, is there ever a game you really know going into what's going to happen aside from a huge upset? And that's when your team's middle of the pack and you're playing Georgia. That's really about the only game that or Alabama, the top dog of the country.
Right.
If you get that win, other than that, you don't know week to week. It can go any way. And this past year against Florida, it was that was one that almost derailed our season, and it's a season that almost got Billy Napier fired in his second year of being a head coach at Florida. If the fans of Twitter had their say, Billy would be back in Lafayette, Louisiana, and coaching the Raging Cajuns. So uh, you never take any game for granted in the SEC. I've learned that.
And of course, we've talked about it. I think I've hinted at it in other episodes, but got to be up at Mizzou and Como this past year for that game. I still on my phone have that final field goal that won the game for the Tigers. And so I will say that that night, that atmosphere was definitely an SEC atmosphere for sure. Loud, crazy. Uh, I was surrounded for the most part by Missouri students, which I've got to say, not too bad.
Yeah,
You think that may be a volatile situation. They're really cool, but I've learned in the SEC a lot of the times if you're at away stadiums or even if you're just sitting by away fans and you're the home team, if you act cool to the fans, they're gonna act cool to you. Just I'll cheer for my team, you cheer for your team. Don't be a jerk, and everything should be fine.
I've never had a problem other than Baton Rouge, and I promised myself after that game I'll never go back. Uh,
No comment.
we were getting beat. Just tell you a quick story. We were getting beat 42-0. My uncle was an LSU fan. I'm the one that came up with the tickets, and we score a touchdown. And I stand up, just being sarcastic, smart mouth that I am, saying, "We're on the comeback." People threw drinks, food at me, cussed me, and I was like, "Y'all have this game. I've had to sit here through 3.5 quarters of listening to Neck and OEO, you suck." Like, allow me to have a little bit of fun in this. We're obviously not going to come back and beat y'all, but my goodness, that's a that's a different animal down there in Baton Rouge.
Yeah, jeez. I won't get into much of my Baton Rouge travels, but I will say this past year having a fan run up after the game and yell in the face of my 5-year-old nephew was probably a low light of my 3 trips to Baton Rouge.
Yeah.
Um, and I will refrain from saying anything else for now. But
Hey, all it takes is one bad apple to make a bad memory of a whole stadium. There's 90 something thousand people there, and that
yep,
one person can ruin it for you. And that's what's great about the game, and that's what sucks about the game is
yep,
we can hang on to those things for so long.
yep. And I'm not going to pretend that you come to Gainesville and everything's peachy. So I
Yeah.
don't want anyone to mistake that. But it could just be that one. But that's all I'm going to say.
Now,
But maybe next time I guest on the SEC podcast here on the College Huddle, maybe Chris and I will have a discussion about Red Stick and the fun fun that's there. So look at
now,
that
Daniel, I
plugging
do want to I
College
do
Huddle.
want to ask you. I know this is your show, and I'm not supposed to be the one asking questions. You said you went this past year, and do you walk away leaving Columbia thinking better of Mizzou as the football program, the university, and everything? Like, TV doesn't do it justice. I've always said that. You being there, and you spoke highly of the environment and everything. So, uh, did it exceed your expectations? And you look at Mizzou at it in a different light than what you had before going to Columbia?
100%.
Okay.
Definitely. As I've told you, and I'll say it here for everyone going to uh, Columbia. It was my first solo away trip. First time I went to a game by myself, so didn't have anyone with me. Uh, got into town kind of early, walked around the stadium, was like, okay, whatever. Text my brother, hey, look, it's a Big 12 stadium. Granted, it's bigger than certain SEC stadiums in Nashville. But I make that joke, and then the rest of the night, it really impressed me. Coming alive, it was in the 30s. It was cold that night. Awesome atmosphere, especially for the weather, which you're probably used to that weather. Kind of like if you come to us in early September, we're used to the heat, but we are not used to that cold. So
Yeah.
everyone being as raucous and whatnot, and of course, for anyone who's never been to Columbia, you will know how to spell Mizzou by the end of pregame because one side of the stadium is spelling M-I-Z, the other replies with Z-I-U after every play. And it's
It's
not.
not it's not every play, but I'm sure it can seem that way. Yeah. Yeah.
So, speaking of yelling, arguably after every play, M-I-Z-Z-O-U, um, what are possibly some other traditions that go on having to do with Missouri?
Okay, well, that tradition, do you know where we got it? The Mizzou.
I do not.
It was from a game I believe in Columbus, Ohio against I know it was against Ohio State, but I think it was there. And I guess their stadium does a thing where OHIO back and forth. And some Mizzou fans that had traveled there liked that, and they've kind of started that tradition with the MIZZOU. Uh, After every first down, the PA announcer, and that's another first down, MIZ, and then the whole crowd yells back ZOU. So uh, thank you, Ohio State, for that because I love doing it. And this year I got to take my sons to their first Mizzou games, and hearing them chant the MIZZOU, that warmed my heart, and you know almost made me tear up. But other traditions, a lot of people look at the stadium and say, "Why do you have a pile of rocks?" Well, in 1920s, when the stadium was being born or being built, there were some rocks left over, and they designed them in the Rock M, and it just kind of took off from there. Well, now the Rock M has turned into, I believe, every year the incoming freshmen of certain organizations paint the rocks white, and then on the last home game of the season on senior night, as long as the Tigers win, which we did against Florida, you were there for senior night, and uh, all the seniors get to go up on the hill and pick their own rock, and that's something that they get to take home with them, and you know put on their mantles or wherever they want that memorabilia to look at. Uh, as far as other traditions, there's a lot of schools that dispute this. Uh, I believe TCU, as I was telling you in the pre-show, is the original one to call the alumni home. I may be wrong on the school there. I know we were not the first, but in 1911 we were the first to start the tradition of annually having homecomings. So homecoming on an annual tradition was originated in Columbia. Uh, in the 80s, we named our mascot after the one Missouri president. It's Truman, after Harry S. Truman. Uh, as far as traditions, without like going through and Googling and remembering everything, like, you know, the university's kind of pulled back on some of them that we had done in the past and whatnot. But uh, like there's a song, and I'm not really sure how long this has happened, but it's Mr. Brightside. And uh, after the course plays through, then everybody stands and yells and reminds everybody else in the stadium that we don't like Kansas. I'm sure,
Yep.
yeah, it's supposed to be getting scaled back. I heard during basketball season that it's probably not going to get played anymore because of the language that comes out of the student body and everywhere else. But uh, it's not one of those. I've been to some away SEC games, and it's like thing after thing after thing, during the game of different things. And I don't really, unless there's something I'm missing out on, I don't really know other than the Missouri Waltz is played uh, along with around the national anthem time. That's the state song, and there's a little dance that goes with it and whatnot. But uh, it's not it's not like a whole list of traditions that we have at Mizzou for football Saturdays.
And you know what? That's fine. I mean, we've had people come on here that really are like, I'm not sure what traditions my school have.
Yeah.
And here you are laying out quite a few. So, going into this next question, this is something I've started asking of every school. If you could define the culture of Mizzou in one word, what would that be?
The culture of Mizzou. And we're just talking or talking football program, right?
Whether you want to do football or just Mizzou in general.
Now, this probably won't resonate with the younger crowd. Me being 37, just fresh. Uh, I would say fresh if I had to describe it in one word. The Eli Drinkwitz has come in, and after last year, the bar has been raised and the talent that he's bringing in. The 220 something $1 million stadium renovation that's supposed to be done by 2026. Uh, the the level of recruiting at which Eli is recruiting. We're getting down in the finalists with 4 and 5 stars at rates we have not seen, and we're getting uh, quite a few of those that we're making the final calls for. Uh, there's a lot of national media talking about Mizzou now. Preseason rankings, we're going to be around that 10 line mark. So I think fresh from a Mizzou standpoint, it's the new kids on the block that a lot of people don't like being there, but we're here.
And that works for me. So let's go ahead and switch up gears a little bit. And I'm going to ask you, what would you, or could you go ahead and tell us your story of being a fan in Mizzou? How did you become a fan?
Well, I grew up in Southwest Missouri, about 5 hours, I believe it is, from my dad's house to Columbia. Uh, right on the Oklahoma line, 20 minutes away from Arkansas. University of Arkansas is actually the closest university I've ever lived to or lived by. Now I'm 40 minutes south of it. I grew up 40 minutes north of it. But uh, dad was a Mizzou fan. So Saturdays, if it was on TV, in the 90s, we didn't get every game on TV. So then we'd fire up the old FM radio and listen to Mike Kelly, who's still doing the play by play. And I think he is one of the most underrated uh, play-by-play radio guys across the country, and he's such a good guy. The way he does it, I wish more people across the country knew about him and could go listen to his calls. But I had just fallen in love with him, and then uh, you break around 2000, and you get this young highlight reel of a quarterback and Brad Smith come in, and seeing the plays he made, and then you know you turn on basketball, and Norm Stewart is finishing up his illustrious career, and uh, you know then you have this new generation of Mizzou basketball coming, and man, just the energy and being, even though I was closer to OU and Arkansas geographically, I was inside the border of Missouri, so there's a state pride of being a Missouri boy, and uh, so it just, with that being the only D1 school, it didn't matter how far away it was. That was the one I was gonna fall in love with, and it's rooted in there. Brad Smith has a lot to do with my football fandom, as far as from the university and getting so deep rooted in it. But just love kind of being the underdog role too, because we've pretty well been that my whole life.
Awesome. Now, would you say Brad Smith is your favorite player?
Actually, no. As good as he was, there was a receiver that he threw the ball around to, Justin Gage, number 12. And I think the reason Justin Gage, I look back on him so fondly, he was a really outstanding receiver, but he also played basketball and wasn't just a reserve player. Like he played a lot of minutes on, when it came basketball season. So just getting to see him play two sports every year, uh, I thought that was so cool. And then he got to the NFL and played with the Titans and Bears, I believe. And he was okay. Like never was going to get on great with the numbers, but um, him representing the university and at the pro level, Justin Smith would be another one, defensive lineman that went on to play with the 49ers for a long time. But I would say Justin Gage is probably my favorite, just because of the two-way sports and going to the NFL like that.
Awesome. And what would be a favorite memory of yours of Mizzou athletics?
It will be hard to beat 2010 going to my first game, buying a ticket for me and my dad for his birthday. And so October 23rd, 2010, number one OU comes in. College game days there. We don't get there early enough to partake. It was a homecoming, but we didn't get there early enough to do any of the pregame stuff. But we beat OU that night, and that's something I don't think we'll be able to top being at Fro at the first time in that group with the stadium, packed to the brim and knocking off number one. Uh, that was pretty special. Yeah.
Definitely would be special. I mean, as a Gator fan who's, seen a lot of big games, and like you talked about the underdog role, during my time as a Gator fan, we've had games where we're the underdog, but we're not expected to be the
Yeah.
underdog, if that makes sense. But
Yep.
you talked about how, that's who you've been since you've been a fan, is Mizzou's been the underdog, and you love embracing that. So to be like almost the ultimate underdog to number one and do that at homecoming in your first trip, that's awesome. Like
Yep.
and taking your dad to a game, so that's really cool in my book.
Yeah.
um and then I guess one more question for you personally, I guess, before we get into your podcast. I know you've also got a very cool story having to do with um Eli Drinkwitz family. You've talked about how you're kind of laid up in bed. We joked about how you're a sort of a captive guest here, but if you don't mind sharing that, could you tell our listeners
Yeah.
a little bit of your interaction with the Drinkwitzes?
Well, on May 2nd, 5:30 in the morning, starting my day off, I unload sand off rail cars and load it out to customers on 18 wheelers. Um, and normal day, got up and drove to work. Got there to unload the rail cars, and in the process of setting and adjusting brakes, the cars took off. In a matter of a split second, somehow my right foot got in the wrong place. It might be the right foot, but it was definitely the wrong place. And the train car ended up driving over it. And if you kind of imagine this as the bottom of your foot, this being the second toe, so big toe, second toe, from here down to about here on the side of your foot, uh, all well, I'm looking at myself backwards here. So all that above my fingers being gone. Uh, Ended up in the hospital for 12 days, two surgeries, and around day 10 or 11, uh, my wife, she calls. She's like, "Hey, I just want to make sure you're awake. You have some visitors getting ready to be there that I want to make sure you're awake. I can't tell you who they are." It's like, "Yeah, I'm awake. Okay." Well, then I get my phone. I'm trying to figure out like who's getting ready to come up here to see me that my wife can't tell me. Well, I had two missed calls from a co-host of the podcast, Case, who lives up in the Kansas City area. And I was like, "Oh, Case came down from Kansas City to come see me. That's pretty cool." Like I thought I had it figured out before the knock on the door. And so this is totally in my mind. I'm convinced Case and his family's coming to see me. I get a knock on the door and say, "Come in." And she said, "Skeeter?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." And opened the door, and it's uh older couple, and they've got Mizzou shirts, and the man's got a Mizzou hat on. I'm like, I don't have a clue who these people are, but I love them, with all the Mizzou stuff on. And she said, "You you don't know who we are, but we know who you are. Really like Drinkwitz, mom and dad, and we heard about you at church, and we wanted to come up and brighten up your day and pray with you." And they had a huge gift bag, and it had a hoodie, a polo, a T-shirt, cups, pom poms, all kinds of stuff. And they had heard about me. My wife's friend, her dad is pastor of a church in the area, and uh, Eli's born and raised from this area that I live in Arkansas, and down here in the River Valley. And so the wife's friend's dad told the church about me when they were taking up prayer requests, and somehow I got brought up after church when he was talking to Eli's mom and dad, and he ended up letting it slip that I was a big time Mizzou fan. And so they were coming up to Rogers. It was Mother's Day weekend. On that Saturday night, they're going to have dinner with one of their daughters, and they wanted to come out of their way, come up about an hour early, and bring some Mizzou stuff. And they sat in there talking to me for close to an hour, uh, prayed with me, prayed over me, and man, I know they're just people, and I know it doesn't make them any more special because who their son is. Honestly, it was just the genuine goodness and humanity that you don't see or hear a whole lot of anymore. You watch the
Right.
news or anything, you think everybody's evil in their heart, uh, but it had me in tears, and uh, what that did for my spirits at that time, was great, and honestly gave me a lot of helped in giving me the motivation to, okay, this ain't the end of it. I'm still here, and there's still gonna be good things in life to enjoy.
Very, very cool story. And one of those stories that doesn't happen without college football,
Yep.
and
Yep.
that's why we love the game. Is there's always feel good stories, and that's one thing that we've tried to highlight on this show. Whether it's something like your story, of course, talking to Purdue or Washington or wherever, find that goodness everywhere and where it comes through in college football. So that's you know really cool one to hear and show that there is good in the world.
Yeah. Well,
Sorry, I got removed for a second. I
there you
apologize.
are. There you are.
Yeah, but you would think that everything has everyone's got evil in their heart, like you said, but the more you look, you can find good, and I think there's a lot of good just paying attention to the college football world. You can find that whether it's something that we not talked about, on this podcast or whatnot, like the wave at the Iowa Hawk
Iowa. Yeah. Yeah.
and stuff like that. I actually met someone, my neighbor actually, his daughter works at that hospital.
Really.
Right. Yeah, and here I'm in Florida, and we're
Yeah.
Iowa because we're talking about hospitals and good stories, and that might be one of the best traditions.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, along with
I
several other.
did. I I did forget a tradition earlier, uh, and it crossed my mind. So if you got a second, I want to talk about it real quick.
Sure.
So when the stadium was built back in the 20s, uh, a big thing back then, football stadiums had tracks built around them. Uh, and so all the way up till last year, it was still an open track. Well, now it's grass, and when you're walking up to Faroe Field, it looks tiny for an SEC stadium. But then when you get up there to it and you realize, hey, this is built down in the ground, you see how much bigger it is. And so we have an old fire truck that's painted in Mizzou yellow or gold, whatever color you want to call it. And when the Tigers come out of the tunnel for pregame, the truck fires up and drives around on what used to be the track. It's still flat there on that part. And when you get to the student section, I don't know if you notice this. It does not matter how warm or cold it is outside. Truman, our tiger, the mascot, has a fire extinguisher, one of them that's filled with water, and he goes to the student section and sprays them down before every game. It was done at your game when it was 30 degrees out, but that's one of the traditions, and I'm not sure how long that one's happened, but it's definitely been there for quite a few years now.
I remember the fire truck. I'll be honest, I don't know if I saw the spray down. So
It
good,
yeah,
good
it
to know.
happens. Yeah. Yep.
So let's go ahead and switch up gears one more time. Let's talk about the uh, Woods Water Mizzou podcast. Tell us about the name. Tell us what you guys are about.
Okay, well, uh, I I got into listening to podcasts really heavy when I started traveling a lot. I used to be a certified crane operator and traveled the country doing construction, and so I had a lot of time to listen. And it kind of got to a point in time where music just kind of became stale to me, and so started finding different podcasts. Well, then I got to looking, and I was getting really, really hyped for football season 2021. I think just uh, after what Eli did in that COVID year, and I was sold on him, and I was like, oh man, what's he going to do? Well, there wasn't enough Mizzou podcasts to fill out my week, and I was like, man, somebody needs to do something. Like, we need more Mizzou stuff out there. Well, then I found some other podcasts that weren't Mizzou related that were just kind of fan ran. And I was like, but one of them, one podcast I like listening to on a weekly basis was Door Bumper Clear. It's a NASCAR podcast, and it's by three different spotters. They're in the NASCAR Cup Series. Well, they were sponsored by Anchor.fm at the time. And so they always had this ad read in there talking about how easy it is and free to start your own podcast. And so it started to hit me like, I might do a podcast. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. Like, nobody wanted to listen to me for, I get tired of listening to myself. So, nobody wanted to listen to me for 30 minutes at a time. And so I reached out to a couple Twitter friends. That's another great thing about Twitter is you find people with similar interests all across the world. You don't have to be next door neighbors. And so I messaged them and said, hey, what do y'all think about doing a podcast? And they were both, hey, I've been thinking about doing that. It's kind of crazy you ask because I've been thinking about it. And I was like, well, I'm thinking about starting one. You want to see if we can work on one together? And so we asked around to different people and that did podcasting for advice. And one of the biggest things they said was audio quality. Nobody wants to listen to poor audio. Then they said you need to find your niche. Like, you need to find your own unique group to fit in. And so we were thinking like, okay, well, we're not going to compete with the Mizzou insiders, the people that are there with the passes and all that. Like, but we want to talk Mizzou. So what's our niche? Well, we all three are dads. We all three are Christians. We all three love the outdoors, especially hunting and fishing. And so we're like, well, what if we kind of, you know, Missouri's big with Kansas City and St. Louis, but the state itself is massive and a lot of it's rural. And so what if we take that rural side and throw it into the podcast with it? And it was actually, I believe, Case or Cole, one of the two, is one of their ideas first to throw the outdoor segment in there. And we're like, okay, that's it. And so then we started thinking of names, and uh, Cole came up with the Woods Water Mizzou, and it's very fitting. We love the deer woods, turkey woods, um, love the water on fishing, swimming, all that type of thing. And then we love Mizzou, and so uh, when you find us and listen to us, we want it to sound like three dudes sitting around a campfire at the deer camp or something. We're not professional media. Uh, we all three have regular day jobs that we do Monday through Friday. Uh, Cole's is including weekends because he's air traffic controller there at Columbia. But it's three guys that love Mizzou and love the outdoors, and so uh, that's how we want it to come across. And we're in our second year of wrapping up our second year, going into our third year this fall. Uh, we know there's still ways to improve, but it's we've developed. I'll be honest with you; those two, you go to my phone and go my frequently contacted. Case and Cole are the top two. They've turned into my best friends. They've turned into family, and love doing it. And then this past fall I got introduced to Eric over at the OHIO podcast and uh, helped preview the Cotton Bowl for his podcast and kind of developed a friendship there. And then he came back to me a couple of months later and said, "Hey, what about this College Huddle thing?" And so now we're the official Mizzou representative for the College Huddle. Uh, and man, what an awesome community it has been since my injury. I've looked at it a whole different viewpoint, and it's a huge family. So this podcast has just continued to bless me with the relationships and friendships that I've personally built through it. But yeah, we're just for the short answer there, we're just three dudes sitting around talking Mizzou and hunting.
For sure. No, I like the the long answer for sure. Hearing all about it, and for those that don't know, on the Gator Truth Florida football podcast that I do outside of Why We Huddle, I've actually introduced talking about your the community of the College Huddle. I've actually gotten a new intro and outro this year. Before it was just music. Now I've got video of that. The first person I ran them by actually is Skeeter. He was the guy who was saying like, "Hey, what do you think of this?" And he's
Yeah,
like, "Thumbs up, thumbs down." So if you're a Gator fan, you've listened to the podcast or seen one of the new episodes for this preseason, you can thank the intro and outro, at least how they've ended up. You can thank Skeeter for that because he has
as you
been a
doing the work, as you doing the work, I give you viewpoints. That's it.
yeah, well, definitely. It definitely helps to make it as good as we can.
Yeah,
Granted, I do have Ricky Pearsall scoring a touchdown at Mizzou as part of that intro. And I think the outro. I think that might be the clip that ended up being used twice, but
that's okay. If you can give me the field goal of Harrison Vivas kicking the game winner, we'll use that clip in our
yeah, and
intro
you
and
know what?
outro. Yeah,
I do have it, so I might
yeah.
send that to you every once in a while when Florida fans talk about that game. I mean, I will on Twitter be like, "You mean this game?" and then add the clip, and they're like, "Why'd you do that?" Because it's still on my phone. Just like our failed Hail Mary against Tennessee 2 years ago is
Yeah.
on my phone. Where if we just block for half a second longer, we went on a walk-off Hail Mary, and instead Anthony Richardson gets hit as he's throwing, so the ball comes up just short, gets picked. But you see the receiver, Justin Shorter, who's going to be behind the defense because they're both flat-footed staring forward, and he's got full steam for that touchdown if he's not hit. And I keep it for just that reason, to be like, hey, we were this close, but you
When
know, close doesn't count.
seeing that look on your face, I have too many of them games of my years of being a Mizzou fan. Uh, you
Flea
know,
kicker.
would you believe that wasn't even the worst loss at home in the '90s?
I would believe it, but
Uh,
oh,
1994, I think it was. I may be wrong on the year, but Cordell Stewart and the Colorado Buffaloes, when the year they won their national championships, the Chang gang forgot to swipe the card after one of the downs,
oh, the fifth down,
and so they got
yes.
a fifth down, and that was a Mizzou fan on the Chang gang running the down sign. Imagine being that guy having to live with yourself the rest of your. That would be hard. That would be hard. But yeah, when you give them an extra down, and I think that to me that would fall more on coaching and referees for not catching that one. Should be on that one man to realize what down it is, But uh, there's
Oh
been
man,
there have been just as many hard Mizzou losses as the great Mizzou wins in my lifetime. It's not easy being a Mizzou fan, but I believe when we get that national championship, that victory is going to taste so sweet because of all those hardships we've had to go through and, forge us in the fire, so to say.
For sure. That's one thing. Anyone that's listened to the 10 previous episodes of Why We Huddle, I've heard me say to a lot of people, the hard times make the victories at the end of them so much sweeter. And,
Absolutely.
as we've talked to, teams like Purdue, which is very similar to Mizzou in that it's a general role for the underdog and then
Yep.
hopefully comes up, or Oklahoma State, or any number of the teams. Mississippi State, who I was like, hey, with the 12-team playoff, you never know what's going to happen. And especially this year. So as we wrap it up, I do want to say Mizzou is not on Florida's schedule. Go ahead, win all your games in the SEC. I will be very happy with that. Cause chaos. Although from the looks of it, you got set up to cause chaos. So
Absolutely.
good luck with
Uh,
it.
it's it's a year coming in with expectations unlike anything I can recall. So uh, this is this is different for us because now we feel like we have a standard or expectation that we haven't had in years past. Years past was maybe we might get 10 wins. I don't think 10-2 is going to suffice a lot of the fan base this year with expectations. So, big year for us, and look forward to many, many more years in the SEC, uh, playing Florida, playing them again and letting those weird games happen that happen between
Yeah.
us. So, I'm excited and I appreciate you taking the time and inviting me on. Uh, love the college huddle, love the community and the ways we're able to bounce ideas back and forth, but also the ways we support each other. And so I was glad to be able to come on here, but I appreciate the invite of you throwing it out.
Oh, for sure. I appreciate you coming on, and sharing your love for Mizzou and everything else, including your cool story meeting the coach's parents, you know, just
Yeah.
a month and a half ago. So
Yeah. Yeah.
very, very cool times. Well, thank you for coming. And for everyone listening, thank you for listening and discovering why we huddle.